So not to interrupt that. Thank you again for joining the MNA Virtual Member Town Hall meeting. We are really excited to have you here today. Today we have some really great speakers who are going to be speaking about gathering insights on the new overtime rule that impacts Michigan nonprofits. Today we have with us David Thompson and Tiffany Carter joining us from the National Council. I wanted to do a brief introduction of them. Yes, they're waving their hands as well. Let me go. All right, thank you so much for being here with us. Let me see if I can add this properly. Yes, so David and Tiffany join us today from the National Council for Nonprofits, which predicts that has predicted that the overtime rule will take effect this summer. The National Council for Nonprofits is an active at the local, state, and federal levels, advancing nonprofit policy priorities in the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. Through its membership state associations and nonprofit allies, the Council of Nonprofit amplifies the voices of America's local community-based nonprofit organizations, helping them engage in critical policy issues affecting the sector, like today. Joining our conversation. David L. Thompson is Vice President of Public Policy. He has served in all three sectors. Over the course of his career, he's practiced law for 17 years, specializing in labor relations, employment law, government contracting, and subsequently directed federal and state advocacy for government relations firm. And Tiffany Gorley Carter serves as a policy counsel for National Council of Nonprofits and works to advance the public policy priorities for the organization. Working in all three levels of government and all three branches of government, she tracks and spots trends of policy threats and opportunities for nonprofits. She covers a broad range of issue areas, including taxation, budget and spending, employment, government grants, contracts, advocacy rights, and regulations. I really appreciate you guys taking the patience with me as I just share with you about their bios and really highlight the expertise that is joining us today from the National Council of Nonprofits. We really appreciate their participation and openness to have an open conversation with us. I am going to turn it over to David and Tiffany now, but I wanted to just highlight that we are hearing from them today, but they also want to hear from you. So if you would like, they encourage you to please share, insert yourself if you have a question. You can either unmute yourself and please feel free to raise your hand as well as a reaction, or the chat is open, so you may also enter your questions in the chat and then they will filter them as well throughout the conversation to help kind of guide the conversation. And again, at the end of the presentation, we will stop recording at the end of the presentation and then again, open up the room for open questions. But just know that we are going to be recording just during their presentation. And again, all those who have attended will get a copy of that. So I will stop sharing and then turn the microphone over to David and Tiffany.
Let's see. Is this working? How are we doing?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Perfect.
I cannot see you or the clock. My colleague Tiffany Gorley Carter is going to be instructing me. So if it seems like she's being mean and interrupting and so forth, well, that's her job. So we're going to talk about the overtime final rule, which came out right when this session was originally scheduled. We had some other conflicts and things. But I do want to admit we are national network of state associations of nonprofits. Michigan is one of the very strongest and bestest. We get to work with Joan Gustafson on a regular basis, and we have a call with her in an hour or so. We get to work with Kelly a great deal. And as importantly, we get to work with Donna Murray Brown on a regular basis because she's now Vice President of Development here at the National Council of Nonprofits. So Michigan is at the center of our thinking. So that was my pandering to the audience part of the program. What we're going to talk about is these areas. You will get these slides, so don't feel like you need to take notes. Instead, kind of write down your thoughts, questions, and so forth. We're going to do something different. I've seen several presentations on the overtime rule, and I get tired of waiting on people going through all the background. So we're going to tell you the meat up front, what the changes are, what's the cost of compliance, and answer that big question, is it really going to happen? or predict anyway, or guess. Then we're going to go back, do kind of a Fair Labor Standards Act, Federal Wage and Hour Law 101, just to put all of that in context. And then what the heck can you do about it? We're going to refresh the numbers, what you can do to be getting ready for it to go into effect, and then some good, bad, and ugly options that you can follow. Again, you don't need to take notes. But first, lawyer's caveat. I don't know if Tiffany, do you want to be the iron fist on this one?
Yes. So we like to say we are lawyers, for or bad, however you want to look at it, but we are lawyers, unfortunately. But we are not your lawyers. So we are talking about legal stuff, and we'll try to keep David from going too legalese into the weeds, but we are not giving legal advice. And if feel free to ask questions, interrupt us, and etc. But we'll try to answer them as best we can and not give you the it depends. Well, on the one hand, blah blah blah. But we won't be giving you legal advice in the answer. So if we get too close, I'm gonna be the bad cop, bad lawyer telling David to stop.
Thank you. Think of Tiffany as I'll be the witness before the congressional hearing. And when I lean over, that's asking my smart lawyer. That's Tiffany's role. Also, she'll be watching your questions, tracking them, perhaps answering in the chat or interrupting to raise it. So we're a tag team. I can't read and talk at the same time. So that's the plan. First, the bottom line up front, the key details up front of what has happened. Over there on the left side of that slide, you'll see, in a nutshell, for most charitable nonprofit workers, there's another slide about a small subset, but for most of your workforce, our workforce, in order for someone to be exempt from overtime, to be treated as a white collar employee and paid on salary and salaried versus hourly, they have to, and I'll explain all this more in detail. They have to be paid on a salary basis. They have to live up to the duties, perform the duties of executive, administrative, or professional employees. EAP, executive, administrative, professional employees, makes up the white collar exception to overtime. And they have to be paid a minimum salary. So it's called the salary threshold, the salary level threshold. That's what's changing here. On July 1st, 39 days from today, the minimum salary threshold for white collar employees will go up to $844 a week, which is how the Department of Labor defines it, which makes out to about $44,000 a year. If someone is, regardless of their duties, if they're paid less than that amount, they're not exempt from overtime and they would have to be paid time and a half overtime. 6 months later, July 1st, and what we're hearing is that first jump, most nonprofits have already made that adjustment because of inflation. 6 months later is a big jump, over $200, almost 200, more than $200 a week, which is a big jump, $15,000 difference annually, to the $1,128 or nearly $59,000 a year. That if you're not paid, if the person is not paid that amount, they're going to have to be paid overtime or other options, which we're going to talk about. And then 3 years later, July 1st, 2027, the new rule, the $1,128 per week is adjusted for inflation. And that will happen every 3 years. That's just the big news up front. Next, there's another category called highly compensated employees. Applies in hospitals and so forth, but in higher ed perhaps, but not as much in most charitable nonprofits. I'm not going to spend much time on it. It's the same rule, except you have to be paid on a salary basis. You perform some of the duties of the white collar employees, executive, administrative, professional, and you have to be paid starting July 1st, $133,000. That's up from $107,000. So that's a pretty big jump, but that's adjusted for inflation. And then in 6 months later, July 1st, 2025, it goes up $19,000 more. So that's a big jump. A lot of people are gasping at that, saying, how the heck are we going to pay for it? Just like the other one, in 2.5 years, the automatic adjustment, the inflation adjustment kicks in. going forward. The Department of Labor estimates what is this going to cost? The Department of Labor estimates that 460,000 nonprofit employees who are currently treated as exempt from overtime would be covered by would lose their exemption because of the amount they're currently paid in salary. And the nonprofits would either have to pay more or treat them as non-exempt. The word terminology in this law is annoying. Non-exempt means hourly, meaning you have to pay overtime. The Department of Labor estimates about $45 million in the first year that nonprofits would have to pony up to spend more, which is they say is about $1,777 per entity in that first year, and then going forward over years, presumably it would go up. Big question: is there going to be litigation? Is this going to be struck down by a court like it was back in 2016? And the short answer is, Tiffany said I wasn't going to say that, but I am going to say it all depends. And anyone who tells you they know for sure it is going to be struck down is making it up, because no one knows for sure. Quick background: 2016, the Obama administration put out a high overtime final rule. It was blocked by a federal judge in October before going into effect in November or December. And the administrations changed. The Trump administration withdrew the Obama rule, so it did not go into effect. And a Supreme Court, higher court did not formally rule that injunction back in 2016 was the law of the land. So it's uncertain. Trump administration withdrew it. Then 2 years later, in 2019, came out with an adjustment to the salary levels, the salary level test. They just adjusted it for inflation from 2004 to 2019. So the 15-year adjustment bumped up that salary level. There was no objection from the employer community. It went into effect. This time around, they're doing two things. They're doing an inflation adjustment up to in 39 days, July 1st, and then they're changing the formula that bumps up the number a lot higher. The Obama proposal is less aggressive than the Obama rule. The Biden proposal is less aggressive than the Obama rule, but it's more than the Trump inflation adjustment once the January 1st rule goes into effect. Will a court say that Obama went too far? That Biden went too far? Will a court say that they threaded the needle perfectly? Nobody knows. So the bottom line to it is that we all need to be taking it seriously and take it as an opportunity to adjust our wage and our standards. We all ought to be doing it on a regular basis anyway. It's painful, it's annoying, but it's still helpful and useful. And we want to be in compliance with the law. So that's the upfront information. Yes, Tiffany.
Before we get into this background, there was a question about what qualifies as time. So is this assuming a 40-hour work week? And how would that affect an organization that has a shorter work week, say 37.5 hours or 35 hours, or if they take summer Fridays or something like that?
Oh, those are great questions. I plan to go over them in the overtime. The short answer is if you have less than a 40-hour work week, doesn't really, and people never work more than 40 hours, it doesn't really affect you. And you can adjust the hours, you can adjust your work weeks and things like that. There are ways of coping. But let me go ahead and get into the background, because I'll be addressing some of those issues. Bottom line up front, this is an old statute. It was enacted in 1938, and that's relevant in your world because the way we do things, the way we write employment statutes today, it's usually written in terms of number of employees. If you have 5 or more or 10 or more employees, this law applies to you. They didn't do that back in 1938. Instead, they determined you were engaged in interstate commerce because they were using they were inventing federal workplace policy. So they used what's the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. So The first level is that all employers, all enterprises with sales, commercial sales of $500,000 or more are covered by the statute, and everybody's covered. Specifically, hospitals and schools are expressly included in nonprofit hospitals, for-profit hospitals, and schools are expressly stated or covered by the statute. So even if you are a small school, you're covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. And then, but if your enterprise, and most charitable nonprofits have less than $500,000 in revenue, much less commercial sales, donations don't count. But it applies to individuals whose job has them engaging in interstate commerce. Most of us immediately assume we're not involved in it. Every one of us on this webinar is engaged in interstate commerce because we're working on the internet. If you do order things, if you use credit, the examples the Department of Labor uses, if you process credit card payments or receipts or donations by credit card, or if you are sending things in the U.S. mail, you are covered. The net effect is that an individual engaged in interstate commerce is just about all of us, to the point where in the analysis that you've received from us, we put this full paragraph, don't bother reading it, the yellow part's the key part. In short, with only rare exceptions, the workforce of charitable nonprofits are covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. And that means that we need to take these rules seriously and evaluate how they do impact. But that particular paragraph is in the analysis that we put together. Continuing with the background, the general rule is that all employees are entitled to time and a half overtime after 40 hours in a weekly pay period. Department of Labor uses, in most cases, uses a weekly pay period. As I'm going to show in a minute, weekly can be defined Thursday to Wednesday. It doesn't have to be Sunday to Saturday. So there's wiggle room there. The exception to all employees covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act must be paid time and a half after 40 hours. The biggest exception is the one we're talking about, the white collar exception, the employees who work in the capacity as executive, administrative, or professional. How do you decide that? Well, actually, a caveat is that, again, the statute says hospitals and schools are automatically covered without without focusing on other details. The statute also says the doctors, lawyers, and teachers are treated as professional. So you don't have to worry about the salary level test. You're automatically treated as a professional and exempt from overtime. Duties test. In order to be, without those two, setting aside those exceptions for express coverage of doctors, lawyers, and teachers, you have to qualify as an exempt person under the white collar rules, executive, administrative, professional. You have to satisfy 3 tests. I mentioned them earlier. I'm going to say them again just so that you understand the context. You're paid on a salary basis, meaning you're not tracking your hours, or you're not paid 38 hours one week because you only work 38 hours. You're treated as salary. You're paid on a salary basis, same amount on a regular basis. Salary level test, that's the one that's at issue here of you have to be paid a certain minimum salary, the one that's going up to $43,000 in 39 days and 50 something thousand in 6 months later. And then the duties tests. You have to perform specific duties that are defined by the Department of Labor as executive, administrative, and professional. Executive means you're in charge and you're managing at least 2 people. A lot of nonprofits have one executive director as the sole employee. Most likely that person is still exempt as a white collar employee under the administrative exemption. Administrative is not basic manual labor or clerical. It's administrative in terms of the program manager with discretion to make decisions for the organization. It's the vaguer area, but the test is relatively clear. when you read it. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail beyond what I just said. Professional is something of higher education, specific training that that qualifies for that category. Some important rules, and this addresses the question that Tiffany mentioned earlier, is pay periods are weekly, but they don't have to be Sunday to Saturday, as I said. Overtime is triggered only after 40 hours in a week. Not in California. If you work, California state law says you trigger overtime after 8 hours. Most other states do not have that requirement. So you could work 40 hours, 39 hours straight and not earn overtime if you are non-exempt. And then no compensatory time is allowed under federal law. This is a shock to most people. The first shock to most people is, wait, what? This law applies to us? In most cases, yes. The second response is, well, I'll just give people overtime or comp time. It is not allowed with nonprofits and for-profit businesses under the federal law. The government employees can use comp time. The idea being that governments are not going to abuse people. Everyone else is going to. So the law says no comp time, which is a real problem because a lot of people assume if you give someone the Monday off after a very busy weekend, you're covered. Depending on pay periods, that would be a violation of the law, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, now I'm going to give a word or two on Michigan law, but I want to say I am not a Michigan lawyer, and I've warned the MNA folks that I hate gray area. When we're talking law, I like to be as clear as possible, and I did not spend 2 days becoming an expert on Michigan law, so I will say up front, federal law, if federal law doesn't apply, then Michigan law does. And it's only when federal law is stronger, federal law preempts state law. If state law wants to say something more generous, or wants to be more pro-employee, they can be. And frequently it's court cases deciding things. So I'm going to say there's a bit of a gray area between federal law and Michigan law that I am not expert on. So I'm warning you that I'm apologizing for that, but saying that's the case. Some items in Michigan law, I bring these two items up because it can cause confusion as you're talking with people. Michigan has a provision that partial year entertainment work, think summer camp, the overtime rules don't apply or something like that. That's when Michigan and not federal law applies. Michigan has a very detailed comp time regime. That if you have a collective bargaining agreement and to protect workers, or if you have a signed agreement and so forth, it allows compensatory time under Michigan law, that's fine if the federal law does not apply. Federal law does not recognize comp time. And I'm trying to disabuse you of that notion because that's the go-to for a lot of nonprofits. So that's the background. And I'll pause in case Tiffany, you want to chime in with a question I didn't cover about the basics.
I do have a question. So there's a follow-up about the 40-hour period. So is it only 40 hours worked, or what if someone has a 40-hour week, but they take, like, say, vacation time or holiday time or sick time in it? At what point is it triggered to go past the 40 hours?
It's 40 hours worked. If someone works, if you have a holiday, like we have next week, it's Memorial Day, if you end up working 40 hours, you get a paid leave on Monday, or you're paid for Monday, and then you work 40 hours Tuesday through Friday. That's still 40 hours. You don't pay overtime on top of the holiday time or the time off. Good question. Getting into compliance, what the heck are you going to do? And there's a lot of stuff here, and you will receive the background materials that go into more detail. Let me refresh your recollection from the first slides, which are in 39 days, the salary level test goes up to $844 a week, or about $4,000 a year. 6 months later, it goes up to about $59,000 for someone to remain qualified as a white collar employee exempt from overtime, and then it'll be an automatic. Then there are higher rates for the highly compensated that I'm not going to repeat. Getting ready. Before these things go into effect, rule number one, don't panic, as I'm going to show in a few minutes, or in a minute. There are things you can do to not just automatically start paying $19,000 more that you weren't budgeting for and didn't expect. Of course, it's always best to talk to a wage and hour lawyer, expert, particularly one expert in Michigan law as well as federal law, and expert in nonprofits. It's really frustrating when you're talking to a wage and hour lawyer who's wanting to talk to you about commercial sales and you don't have those. So, nonprofit wage and hour lawyer would be best. Identify which jobs are impacted. This is kind of a math problem. If you get a printout of salaries and so forth, and just figure out which of your employees would be affected, and what their salaries are. Because if it's real close, if they're already making close to the number, then it's easier just to adjust pay. If there are big differences, or if you have a manager making, an executive making 40,000 and another making 55,000, you have to make some adjustments. So knowing your state of play, or where your staff salaries are, is important first step. First thing you can do. Review benefits packages. You do it on a regular basis anyway. Are there changes you can make to free up money for wages? This can be helpful, or this can be harsh. So recognizing that these can be tough decisions. Also, the next two ones deal with those who are paying you, providing you resources, talking to them in advance, saying, government, we have a grant, we have a 2-year grant from the government, and government's raising our costs. So how about ponying up some more cash, or adjusting deliverables, making it so that we can help accommodate the existing grant so that we can comply or stay in full compliance. Some governments will be flexible. Same with talking to your funders, telling them your cost just went up. Can you give us a cost of living adjustment, which some foundations, and I've known some in Michigan, to do. So it's not an unheard of question to say, I know you gave us a grant of X, but could you give us a grant of X times 10% to cover these costs? Also, you can go to foundations to say, we need to hire a wage and hour, a benefits, or a salary consultant. Can you provide us a grant to hire someone to do that, to go through those steps before the steps above that last bullet point? Now, there are lots of options. I think I have 15 here. I'm going to run through quickly. One of the documents we've shared goes into more detail on them, and you'll see the theme of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Some of these are good ideas. Some of these are bad ideas. Some of these are just flat out ugly. But we want to share them with you, with the warning that the ugly ones, you have employee morale you have to worry about. First option is the obvious one of raising salaries to the new level. Of course, that creates wage compression. Of course, that if you just automatically change everyone from wherever they are to whatever the minimum salary level is, some are going to be frustrated that other person who wasn't earning as much is now making the same. These are personnel, human resources, human nature concerns that you can make adjustments. Maybe it's easier smaller, maybe it's harder with smaller organizations. Another alternative, which is what the law expects, the Department of Labor expects, is that anyone who's not paid that new minimum salary level will be you just convert them to exempt you convert them to non-exempt employees and pay them hourly. Department of Labor employee groups all recognize there is pride at being salaried. Being bumped down from salary feels like a demotion. So there's just real world impact that people are going to be frustrated. Communicate, explain is the best way to go. Another thing you can do is pay overtime to employees above their salaries. So if they're currently you're paying them a salary of, let's say, $40,000 a year, you can just stick with that 40,000, and then but then track their time, and when they do work more, you pay them overtime above that amount. That's a little less harsh, little more employee friendly than the bullet right above, just shifting people to hourly. Another option is you can reorganize workloads to adjust schedules to avoid employees regularly working more than 40-hour work weeks. If Easy example is if someone regularly works 50, a manager regularly works 50 hours a week, and someone else gets their work done in 30 hours and then goofs off for 10, maybe you can adjust the hours. Easier said than done. Easier, or adjust the job duties and things like that. Continuing, reducing the employee benefits and putting money into salaries to meet levels. Are there benefits that you're paying for that nobody cares about, that if it did away with and you put those dollars into salaries, it'll help your bottom line? At the same time, it's low impact. If you take away if you provide health insurance and you take it away, okay, that's an employee relations problem. That's going to be a real hit. I'm saying good, bad, ugly because I recognize these are all theory. In the real world, you don't have cushion in your budget for things like this. So trying to identify options, maybe you do 5 of them and you can cobble together a solution that works for you. Adjust employees' wages so they pay approximately the same total compensation. Okay, this is the ugliest on the list, and I'm going to try to give an example, but I don't have it written out. And the idea is someone regularly works 45 hours a week and you're paying them a salary, but the rule is changing. What you can do is divide their time, not by 45 hours, but by 47 and a half. So that 5 hours extra is time and a half. So 7.5, and then divide their weekly salary by 47 and a half, and you keep paying them at the regular rate. They're going to know what you're doing. They're going to know that you're playing fast and loose with the math. It's legal. You can do it. Whether it's a smart thing to do or not, you have to evaluate. Limit the number, and I'm sorry there's not a math problem on the page, but I didn't want to subject y'all to that. Limit the number of hours non-exempt workers can work. Easier said than done because we're all used to remote work. So thou shalt not read emails after hours. Can you stop that? If someone is hourly and you're sending out an email and they're reading your email after hours, that's compensable. That's time they should be paid for. And if they're regularly working more than 40, or if they're on occasion working more than 40, you're supposed to be paying overtime there, which means you've got to track hours. A lot of people don't. I don't like it that we track hours. A lot of people don't like that, and they consider it a demotion. So it is a challenge. Limiting telecommuting. We regularly hear stories of organizations that are saying you've got to come back in the office 3 days a week, 5 days a week. And all of us who have gotten used to working in our basements don't like that. Limiting telecommuting is a way to curb overtime, and at the same time, it can be annoying or employee relations issue. Redefine the work week. I've said this one twice. I'll say it one more time. The law says 40 hours in a work week, but you, the employer, get to define what that work week is. It can be Thursday to Wednesday. The reason a nonprofit would do that is if they are an arts nonprofit that has shows on the weekends, you just tell people within the same week, if you worked the full 40 hours by Sunday, don't work Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. And that way you avoid overtime. And the perfectly appropriate and proper, almost easy. Okay, I only have 6 more to go.
David,
yeah.
let's pause here real fast because there's a couple questions about kind of making this more flexible. It might actually go into your next bullet point here too. So one, do employees need to be paid weekly? So what if you were actually paid on a biweekly or a monthly payment? And then if they're working on an average of 40 hours a week but being paid monthly, and allowing all sorts of like flexibility in it. It doesn't need to be during, a 9 to 5 on Monday to Friday. Does that flexibility play into it? And how does that affect that kind of benefit, which I would argue is a great benefit for.
Okay. 9 to 5 is only the name of a movie. It doesn't apply. It's 40 hours within the defined work week. So it can be midnight. It can be flexible. In the example here, if you normally work 35 hours and people do nights, read emails and stuff, but still less than 40 hours, no harm, no foul. I was jumping to my answer and I missed some of the question. Sorry.
So you were saying it doesn't need to be 9 to 5, so the flexibility is okay.
Yeah.
What if they're paid monthly? So whenever the flexibility is coming into play, it's a full month of whatever 40 hours times 4 weeks is. How does that get into it?
It would be 160 hours. The pay periods are defined by state law, I believe. So I'm going to give you two evasive answers. In federal law, there is a provision where within an 80-hour 2-week work period, you can have some flexibility. It's a special rule that I didn't reread for the fifth time before the call. There is an exception, but just for an 80-hour 2-week work week where you can work 31 week regular. It has to be a regular schedule where it's 30 hours 1 week, 50 hours the second week. You can average out then. Otherwise, no, it's not allowed for the month. It's only the 2-week work period. The concept being the law, Department of Labor doesn't want employers to be regularly changing work schedules to the detriment of employees. Can you pay on a monthly basis? Certainly hourly people are certainly exempt salary people. You can pay on a monthly basis. Our organization pays on a 2-week basis, which is perfectly legal. But I'm gonna defer saying it depends on what the state law dictates. I'm thinking you can, but then this doesn't necessarily change that.
So just to clarify the flex month, if under this federal rule, you're saying
Not a flex month. Can't do a flex month. You can do a flex 2 weeks.
okay, so you can do the 80-hour every 2-week flexibility, but you can't do 160-hour flexible month.
Correct.
These are great questions, so keep them coming because it really does kind of get down into the weeds a little bit, but in a real life application, not a legalese application.
So on the top bullet here on this page, if you regularly pay a salary, if someone's salary today and they only work 7 hours a day, so 35 hours a week, you don't have to pay overtime if they're working up to 40 hours, and you can keep paying them. You divide their pay by 40, and if they only work 35 and you keep paying the salary, that's fine. You only have to pay if someone becomes non-exempt. You only have to pay 40 hour pay, not over their usual schedule, but over 40 hours. A lot of places include lunch, so you're working 9 to 5. That's 8 hours, and that includes paid lunch. You can cancel paid lunch. People aren't going to like it, but you can do that. There are rules about break times and so forth that is state law. Give exempt employees. This is the old classic of someone now would have to be paid overtime, so the executive director is now running the copier or sweeping the floors or something well into the evening because they can be abused when you don't have to pay when you don't pay overtime to someone else. Another item, we're going to run out of time, so I'm speaking quickly. Switch part-time employees or independent contractors. Big fat warning, should have used bigger letters. The law on independent contractors is stricter, is more tough, complex than this one. It just changed back. The Trump administration loosened the law on and who is an independent contractor, but it's not just a wage and hour law. It's wage and hour, Department of Labor, it's tax law, and it's state law in terms of who is an independent contractor. The law generally an independent contractor, you're not paying FICA, you're not paying benefits and things like that. So you end up usually you're paying them more. You can do it, but if you have a full-time employee, then you declare them independent contractor. Nothing's really changed. Probably that's not going to be lawful. So you can do it, but by all means, do it upon advice of counsel. Make them write it out and sign their name to it. Two more quick ones you can eliminate. This is the worst. You can just get out of the business of doing one thing or another. If there's something you regularly do, and because of this law change, you don't have the money for it, maybe you have to stop doing that program. That's a lost leader that didn't grow like you expected to, and take advantage, or not take advantage, get out of certain service areas because of the cost of this new rule. I'm not praising it. I'm not saying this is a good idea. I do remember, if you may have noticed, this is a Southern accent. When I was growing up, the textile mills in the area of the South where I lived were all closing. They closed at every recession because management took advantage of closing the non-profitable plants when there's a recession so they could blame the recession. You could do that, blame the Department of Labor, or you can do it because there's a need and you flat out can't afford it. I'm not trying to be flippant, I'm just saying management has to make decisions to keep the organization operational and in compliance. Last item seems counterintuitive, eliminating fundraising events. If you have all your salaried employees working a gazillion hours for a fundraiser that only raises $15, maybe you want to stop doing the gala and you do something else, more do a strategic shift. So that's an idea of using this change to rethink your strategic plan, rethink your strategic priorities to see what you can accomplish. Okay, I've left a few minutes. We've covered a couple of questions, and I'm not sure if y'all want to stop the recording or we keep going. I'm fine either way.
No, that was really great. I think we can stop the recording at least for this portion, but I encourage people to still continue to ask questions. Thank you so much for that presentation, David and Tiffany. I mean, really comprehensive.